But our top story right now is President Trump's threats of this trade war, which he then quickly backed off of because it has real-world consequences for you, for people in this country, for people in other countries, even though it is also, as we begin the week, a kind of sputtering opening failure of his efforts. The same Americans who were very concerned about prices and inflation back in November, that was a key issue, we were told by voters, could be impacted by what we can only see so far as Donald Trump's sort of shaky or inconsistent tariff threats. And this is the very start of his tenure. This is his January, February priority based on a November victory. He's in office less than a month, and now we can report, as you may have heard, but we're going to get into the details, Trump is blinking today after threatening what could have been this trade war over the weekend. Now, there are many countries that have tried various tariff efforts for many decades. So we actually know a bit about what you see on your screen, how supply chains and products and grocery prices and shipping, how all of this is affected. Many countries have found that, again, I'm going to generalize, but a sudden sort of one-way effort to engineer tariffs don't tend to benefit the country starting that trade war. And as for the inflation that I mentioned, economists and many impacted businesses estimate that ineffective tariffs, sort of just throwing them out there, will increase inflation, and they become essentially a new tax. So today, that's the context for Donald Trump now backing off what was threatened as 25% tariffs, which is a big, steep hike, on the neighboring countries of Canada and Mexico. He is basically blinking. This story matters even if he backs down. He's also claiming that he got some minor adjustments, but not really at the economic tariff level. That's what he says he's getting in return for delaying the thing he threatened that he's not doing. Donald Trump has pulled his own tariffs and his own tariff schedule. He had vowed these to begin as soon as midnight. Now he's delaying them, he says, for 30 days, but that could be longer given what we've just lived through.
Well, it was obviously going to run into a lot of problems. I mean, first thing to say, I'm not a lawyer, but the tariffs look illegal to me. I mean, Trump invoked an emergency economic powers, and we don't have an economic emergency. We have low unemployment and low inflation. Right. What's this about? And it's also supposed to be used for economic ends, and they sort of settled on drugs as the justification, which clearly was bogus, right? And the drugs, fentanyl here is the weapons of mass destruction of the trade war, and it's a fake argument. And then why do it? Trump has always. This is a personal Trump fixation. This is one of these things where there isn't really a strong interest group. There isn't really a meaningful economic argument. The arguments are crazy. This is just something that Trump, you can find tapes of Trump going back to 1988 saying we should have 25% tariffs. Somehow or other, he made up his mind that he was smarter than anybody else on international trade policy, and this was his moment to do it. And he folded almost instantly when Canada and Mexico revealed that they are actually independent countries with a will of their own.
Yeah, you say he folded instantly because of the reaction to the tariffs. What is that reaction? Why were they so confident? In a different world, in the Trump cosplay fantasy land, he would announce these things. You make a very fair point that there's a lot of questions about the underlying authority. But he would announce something, and then folks would run away and cower. That's the story he sold to his voters, for sure. Yeah. Explain to us how the actual mechanism of the threatened tariff and what they could do in return left them in such a strong position against President Trump.
Well, the main thing to understand is that there is no such thing as a U.S. manufacturing sector. We've had NAFTA, we've had a free trade area for almost 30 years now, and we have deeply integrated manufacturing. If you ask, where was a car, if you buy an American car, where was the car actually made? And the answer is, well, that's complicated. Pieces of it were made in all three countries. Components may have crossed the border 7 or 8 times, which means that even just the U.S. imposing tariffs is imposing a lot of costs on our own industry. And if Canada and Mexico respond in kind, then they're further raising the costs. It hurts them, but it also hurts us. We're kind of in a situation where we're all in a position to inflict a lot of damage because this is, not our we've become mutually dependent. And unlike, U.S. politicians who run and hide under the table when Trump says a nasty word, Mexican and Canadian politicians have to answer to their voters, and they're real countries with real pride and real want to stand up. What was interesting was this was the classic: a bully runs away at the first sign of a real confrontation.
We term some little pain, and people understand that, but long term, the United States has been ripped off by virtually every country in the world. We have deficits with almost every country. Not every country, but almost. And we're going to change it. It's been unfair.
Little pain. This might mean a $12 omelet. Begins when the clock strikes midnight, with the Wall Street Journal identified as, quote, the dumbest trade war in history. We are officially in wag the dog territory, folks. A 25% tariff on nearly all goods coming into the U.S. from Canada, an additional 10% on all Chinese imports. Earlier today, Donald Trump said the U.S. and Mexico reached an agreement to delay the promised tariffs on goods from Mexico. A 1-month delay in exchange for increased security at the border. But still, and yet, the American people who told us that the cost of food and groceries were the most important issue by a mile in their selection of Donald Trump over Kamala Harris in the November election, they stand to pay a fortune, more than $1,000 extra on items, on groceries, items like avocados, tomatoes, strawberries, beer, tequila. And who doesn't need tequila these days? Maple syrup, cars, trucks, gas, consumer electronics, phones, iPads, all that stuff. Lumber, you're doing a renovation or building a new fence, on and on and on, affecting every aspect of an American family's everyday life. Joining our conversation, NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor and NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans. Christine, why?
Well, before the why, I guess the breaking news is that Justin Trudeau from Canada just tweeted that there will be a 30-day pause on those Canadian tariffs. So Mexico got a pause earlier today. So this is sort of how this is going to go. The why is the big mystery. Donald Trump says that the U.S. is taken advantage of. The U.S. is bullied by these much smaller countries like Canada with 37 million people, and that the U.S. can't sell its products all over the world, but we take in everything. So there's just this sense of an aggrieved President Trump. There are certain.
Does Canada bully us?
Canada sells us a lot of stuff, and we sell Canada a lot of stuff. It's one of our closest trading partners.
Mm-hmm.
If you look, Trump is basically threatening a trade war with Canada, China, and Mexico, by far the 3 biggest countries that send us stuff. A lot of stuff, $1.2 trillion of stuff just in the 11 months, the first 11 months of last year. All of those things, if these tariffs go into effect, would cost more money. And we know that it is mostly its importers and its consumers who bear that cost.
Yamiche, when Trump says a little pain, this is a guy who downplayed the impacts of COVID. When he's at a little pain, I wonder what they're really worried about.
Well, what's really striking, because we all know that President Trump campaigned on this message and this promise of lowering costs for everyday Americans. It's something that I heard over and over again on the campaign trail from voters, whether they were voting for President Trump, frankly, or Vice President Harris. The message was that they were very worried about cost of living. But to hear President Trump say that there may be some pain, but that cost of pain will all be worth it down the line, I think was him trying to hedge and prepare the American people for prices going up on everything from avocados coming from Mexico, beer coming from Mexico, lumber, of course, the people trying to buy new homes or build new homes. So this was going to be something that he knew was going to hit the consumers, much like experts, including, of course, Christine Romans and all her great sources tell us when you talk about tariffs. I think I want to go back, though, to this, what Justin Trudeau just posted online, because I think it is striking to hear now that there's going to be this pause, 30-day pause on tariffs to Canada, much like we heard from Mexico earlier today. And Canada is basically saying it's going to roll out new border security measures, which really does go to what President Trump said he wanted out of Canada. I want to read part of it. It says that Canada is making new commitments to appoint a fentanyl czar. They're going to also list cartels as terrorist groups, ensure 24-hour eyes on the border, launch a Canada-U.S. strike force to combat organized crime, fentanyl and money laundering. And they also said he signed a new intelligence directive on organized crime and fentanyl, and they'll be backing with $200 million. He also said he's going to be sending, or at least having, nearly 10,000 frontline personnel. It's not clear if those are going to be new troops, but we know it.
Mr. Ambassador, has your opinion of President Trump changed from when he first came to office in 2016, 2017?
My personal opinion? No, it hasn't changed.
Yeah. Because you wrote in 2017 that the determination of many world leaders to try to normalize this leadership has to be brought to ground. He should not be welcome in our country. Speaking about not welcoming the President of the United States to Canada.
Well, first of all, I made that comment when I was in private life. We've all said different things in private life. But if you said, has my opinion overall changed, I would say to you very directly that the concern that I think all Canadians have, it's not a personal thing about President Trump. The concern we have is that we don't want the administration making and taking decisions that are going to create insecurity, uncertainty, and real collapses in the market in a way that's quite arbitrary. Yeah. And that's why we're trying to have a reasonable and sensible discussion, and that's the kind of discussion
I appreciate
we'd like to have, and one that's respectful. And by the way, we're not the 51st state. We're a sovereign, independent country. Our leader deserves to be treated with respect, and we deserve to be treated with respect, and that's the way we want to proceed.
So, folks, it looks like Canada and Mexico, they both won round one. Donald's going to try to say that he won major concessions, but I don't really think that's true. Again, he started the back down. I've talked about this. I was the first to notice this. Some people were like, oh, Crystal, you're wrong. He's not backing down. No, he backed down even before the tariffs kicked in when he said, oh, I'm only going to do 10%, not 25% on oil. That was the first sign that he understood how disastrous this could be. Wasn't a full back down, but it was a sign that Donald had some non-idiots around him being like, sir, ultimately you're the decider here, but you're deciding a dangerous position. And so he partially backed down. And then he backed down by admitting it was going to be bad. But guys, the two things he supposedly won from Canada and Mexico had already been negotiated, at least tentatively, under Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., the last president. Somebody who, while not perfect, did not insult every single day his two neighboring nations. Right? And so Trump's like, oh, we're going to get more troops on the southern border. They were already coming. He's like, oh, Canada's going to invest $1.8 billion into new border security. That had already been negotiated in December. While Trump was not yet, I don't know if Trump's advance team was part of those negotiations. I'm not sure. Like if Trump's people were in the room because he's about to become president. But he was not president yet. And so the two things Trump won as he lost this first round of the tariff fight had already been negotiated by the previous president. Wall-to-wall failure from Donnie.